Act 1. World War II. The Jack Gutman story by Don Meredith. Based on the book, One Veteran's Journey to Heal the Wounds of War, written by Jack Gutman. What were you doing when you were 18? Hanging around the beach with your friends, grabbing a burger? That's what most 18-year-olds were doing, but not me. I was on an APA troop ship about to land on the beach in Normandy. It was June 6, 1944. My head was filled with pride and terror that I had never known. I could see massive shelling on the beach from our ships. I could hear explosions dropping from planes and see men dying by the hundreds. Over 8,000 men would die that day. The landing boats were circling by the ships, getting ready to load us and drop us off in deep water with heavy packs on our backs. You may have watched a few movies and have some idea what I'm talking about, but let me tell you, the real thing is far, far worse. With my heavy pack on my back, I somehow made it out of the freezing deep water, stepped onto the beach, and started looking for my wounded comrades. My job was to patch them up and evacuate them. It sounds simple enough, but all my training didn't come close to preparing me for what I felt when I saw the first wounded soldier. He was shot in the leg near the groin. There was a lot of blood, and he was screaming in agony. He wasn't much older than I was, and now his life was in my hands. I remember how terrified I was, and how part of my mind just wanted to escape the situation and not let the true horror of what I was looking at and of the scene in front of me into my brain. I was a trained soldier in the United States Navy, and I had a huge job to do. There was no choice, no turning back. At that moment, I went into survival autopilot of sorts. I was running on pure adrenaline and instinct, not thought. There was so much happening around me that even now, 75 years later, I can't begin to recall it all. What sticks out most is the sounds of the explosions. Men screaming for their mothers. Landmines. And those hideous German machine guns spitting out 150 rounds per minute, mowing down my comrades before they could even get to the beach. The loud sound of my own heart beating, pounding in my ears as I tried my best to patch up wounds fast and move on to the next man. The visions of blood on the sand and barbed wire everywhere. Hundreds of uniformed men lying on the ground squirming in agony. Some dying in my arms as I told them they would be okay. You're all right. Still remains with me today. Meanwhile, back home, my best friends were likely out with their girlfriends, enjoying a beautiful day, maybe laughing over a burger and fries at our favorite spot, catching a show, while I was doing everything I could to stay alive. And I did. I somehow made it through that day, and returned home with 5 medals for my contribution in Normandy, and later the Okinawa invasion. I returned home a hero, they say, but I didn't think of myself as one. I thought I was all right and that I had escaped unscathed. But as time went on, I came to realize that while I had returned home uninjured, World War II left permanent scars and wounds on me that I wouldn't fully comprehend until many years later. The words of Jack Gutman. I, Don Meredith, had a radio show on San Diego's oldest radio station, KCBQ. My co-host was a therapist, Paula Shaw, a fascinating dark-haired beauty that was married to a Hollywood writer some years ago. We had some interesting guests, all right. Former Navy SEALs, head of SEAL teams, NFL alumni, David Stanley, Elvis Presley's stepbrother, various specialists, concussion experts, and PTSD experts, all guests by her invitation. So one day Paula casually mentioned her father was a Navy medic corpsman who was in the D-Day invasion of Normandy. We talked further in more detail. She mentioned he, after all these years, was only recently starting to get treatment at the VA for PTSD. After I nearly choked on my coffee, I stared at her for several moments and asked, "Do you think he would come on the show? Could we interview him?" Now understand, I have been interested in World War II. No, obsessed is more like it. She simply says without looking at me, "I'll ask." You must understand that I have for years wanted to interview one of these guys. Over the years, I've watched countless unsatisfying interviews on the military channels and various cable shows, on TV, everywhere. I was always left feeling like they left the best questions on the table. And now, possibly, here was my shot. So 2 weeks later, there he is. He comes around the corner, 92-year-old Jack Gutman, full of energy, full head of hair, with his wife Joyce. They both look more like 75 than close to 92. I have sitting before me a real live, last of the Mohicans, war hero, the guy who saw it all. June 6, 1944. He sat down in the chair under the microphones right in front of me. We both hit it off instantly. I asked him what his game plan was and what can I ask him? In other words, is anything off limits? He explained to me calmly that with his recent therapy at the VA, they advised him to talk about everything, even the most painful things, as that is helpful to his recovery. I could already feel his emotion flooding into the room. He went on to describe how Paula Shaw, his daughter and therapist, had kind of tricked him into therapy a few years ago. Jack proceeded to tell me about his first session. I said, "I can't talk about some of this stuff I saw. It's just too painful." The VA guy then told me, "Jack, I want you to think of these incidents as big ice cubes, and every time you talk about them, they melt a little bit. So yes," he said to me, "ask me anything." That was it. An instant trust had just been established. I soon realized that from that moment on, we would have a meaningful bond. Jack Gutman and I would meet several more times and talk on the phone endless amount of times. And in fact, now, perhaps, I was even a part of his healing process. Imagine 75 years later, after D-Day, the invasion of France, and I get to be a part of a soldier's story from 1944. That would bring me as close to the action as was humanly possible, for not being there. Jack would go on to write a book about his story called One Veteran's Journey to Heal the Wounds of War. Jack's voice. Jack Gutman. Let me start in the beginning. In 1925, Calvin Coolidge was president, and the Pittsburgh Steelers won the World Series that year. F. Scott Fitzgerald published The Great Gatsby, and I was born in San Francisco. Thousands of miles away, Adolf Hitler, a young activist, was resurrecting the National Socialist Political Party, otherwise known as the Nazi Party. My father, Louis, fought in World War I. And my mother, Gertrude, was a Russian aristocrat whose family fled the country when the Bolshevik regime took over in 1917. My parents met at the Grand Hotel in Shanghai, China, where my father was working as a concierge. By my grandfather's standards, Louis was a commoner and not a suitable partner for his daughter. But my father was smart, charming, and spoke several languages, and my mother fell for him. My parents were soon married, and my father brought them back to America. Like many young families living in the 1920s, they struggled to put bread on the table. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, times became even harder for our family. My father sold apples on the street just so we could eat. Having children of my own now, I cannot imagine what my parents must have been going through, but their deep love for one another somehow carried them through. I was 4 years old when the great crash of 1929 happened, Black Friday as it's now known. By then I was one of 5 children in a small apartment with 1 bathroom. I grew up believing in God, and perhaps he lived in our bathroom, because my father often pounded on the door yelling, "God, are you still in there?" Well, anyway, we seldom saw meat on the table, so it was mainly vegetables and likely nourishing. By the time I was 14, my dad was a traveling salesman, and we moved quite a bit and ended up in New York City. I grew up in Manhattan, 104th Street, on the west side. That Christmas, the family was having a particularly tough time in New York. We had little food in our home and absolutely no possibility of Christmas presents. My father, I remember, went down to the corner to get a free Christmas tree on Christmas Eve so that we could have a bit of a holiday cheer. We all felt sad and disappointed we weren't going to have a real Christmas. But, as always, there was a contentment in being together with our family. We did our best to decorate the tree with handmade creations we found around the house. After a little while, we heard a knock on the door. We opened it to find a well-dressed lady standing in our doorway with her chauffeur. They had bags of food, including a big turkey. We had not had meat in the house for many weeks. This kind-hearted woman also had gifts of toys for all of us children, as well as helpful things my parents could really use. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I was so excited. We found out that a few days earlier, my younger brother Martin was at a local toy store looking in the window. The same woman walked up to him and said, "I'll bet you're going to get lots of presents for Christmas." Martin had told her that we were poor and that we were not getting anything for Christmas. Well, this woman had made it her mission to find out where we lived and how many boys and girls were in our family. I have no idea what her name was to this day, but that kind, generous woman was like an angel sent directly from God. It's been over 74 years, and I still see that Christmas Eve so vividly in my mind. It was the best Christmas we ever had. Many years later, I did the same thing for a family in need with my own children. In 1940, I was 16 years old, a teenager living in New York City. I felt like I needed to learn to survive. So I joined a gang called the Panthers when I had the first opportunity, and it was not that unusual in my neighborhood. More of a survival thing. I remember being so proud to wear the club jacket. We actually had a raffle so we could raise money to buy jackets. But just to belong to something, and we had many a fight in Central Park. There was some very real injuries and blood, but no guns. The Sullivan Law back then was absolute. Get caught with a gun, 10 years in prison. So I never saw one. Central Park was huge. It was our place. I mean, we met and dated girls there. We pretty much lived there. That very same year, the British Army evacuated the beaches of Dunkirk, and Winston Churchill declared that Great Britain would never surrender to the Axis. Little did I know that the United States had ceased trade with Japan, cutting off 90% of their oil supply, which ultimately led to the Pearl Harbor attack. In 4 short years, I would find myself on a different French beach fighting the exact same war. And on December 7th, the Japanese military bombed our naval base at Pearl Harbor. I was shocked like everyone else. I never dreamed a small country like Japan would ever do that to the United States. Yet they did. inflicting so much death and damage to our fleet that America finally joined the war effort. I was angry, and I wanted in. My father would not sign for me to join the military, and I was just a few weeks shy of 17. But the following September, with America in the thick of things in World War II, both my parents finally agreed, and a few weeks later, I said goodbye to my family and traveled to a boot camp in Long Island, New York. I remember being so excited on the train ride there, yet not having any idea what I was in for, although I learned pretty quickly that this cocky kid was definitely not in charge. I tested to be an aerial radio man and passed. But in the Pacific, medics were getting killed at an alarming rate as soon as they hit the beach. So much for the Geneva Convention. I guess their strategy was if you kill the medics, you kill the morale. So they needed medic replacements, and I was drafted out of the lot. I did not really have a choice. I was sent to Bainbridge Medical School for a 6-month accelerated training course reduced from 1 year. I assisted during surgery and learned battlefield treatments of all kinds. After that 6 months training, I was sent home for 2 weeks, and then off to Europe on a British ship I went, ending up in Netley, England, which was a run-down hospital. Our medical forces consisted of about 2,000 people, and none of us had any idea what was coming. Later, we found out we were prepping for the invasion of Normandy. There wasn't much to do in Netley, as most of the town was bombed out and destroyed by the Germans. The Germans developed this new rocket bomb called a buzz bomb. When it flew over, it had this mad-sounding buzzing, and when the noise stopped, you knew it was coming down, and it brought some serious destruction with it. And they came over every single night. Meanwhile, we were in our secret section being taught evacuation techniques and prepared for the June 6, 1944 invasion. Around 6 a.m., an armada of 5,000 ships, 4,000 landing crafts, and 11,000 planes and 135,000 men would arrive on the beaches of Normandy in very, very choppy, ice-cold waters. The night before, the Navy gave the soldiers whatever they wanted to eat. This would turn out to be a very big mistake. Many men were seasick and made critical mistakes due to their condition. I mean, imagine being that sick and still having to get into a landing craft. But yet, at 6 a.m., that's exactly what they did, and that's exactly what happened. Down the net we went in the Higgins boats, violently jerking up and down in the rough seas, turning around in tight little circles near the ships. Coming down the net, we would get near the boat, and they would scream, "Jump! Jump!" And this was nothing like we practiced. I see some guys falling off the net with their heavy packs, and they would just go straight under. I was scared. This was not like our drills. Nothing felt right. We were told not to worry. It'll be easy enough. Just land on the beach, take care of the wounded. I mean, we watched the earlier offshore shelling. You never heard anything like this. How could anything survive on that beach? This should be a cakewalk. The water coming into the boat, it was chaos. I was freezing, soaked immediately. We were packed in there like sardines. And guys throwing up on each other. It was a real mess. Nothing was going right as planned. The initial forces will take care of it, I was told. Many guys looked so sick. They didn't care what was happening. I tried to look ahead and out. But there's these tall guys right in front of me. I can't see. They blocked my view. I was straining to see. Finally, I could see. There was a shift. I could see to my left. I'm stunned to see some boats flipped over. There's guys in the water. And the boats just keep going right past them. No one is stopping for them. God, I was soaked. You can see the barriers up ahead now. Poles sticking out of the water. I learned later there were 33,000 landmines. I could see flashes of gunfire now. Germans were shooting. I could hear German machine guns. Flashes. More shooting. Up ahead. Why were those men jumping out of the sides of the boats? That's not how we were trained. But then I figured it out to my horror. The machine guns were aimed right inside the landing boats, even before the front opened to unload the men. As we got closer, we were all trying to crouch down. We saw bodies all over the water. We were scared. Hearing constant machine gun fire now, non-stop. You could see and hear the bullets. They were hitting the boat, the ramp. We were in shock, in total survival mode. The possibility now is that I'm getting killed. I'm getting killed. Guys look scared. Some stoic looking, but they look scared. Some with tight, grimacing faces. Some even with their eyes closed. They all look so scared. Gotta go. The ramp's down. Not anywhere near the beach. What? This is not what we trained for. We were jumping into cold, deep water with packs on. Get to the beach. Just get to the beach. These Higgins boats need 4 feet of water to clear. They were made in New Orleans and made out of plywood, and each held a crew of 36 men. But there were steel poles everywhere, sticking out of the water, preventing our boat from getting any closer. I hit the beach, and I could see bodies floating in the water, and body parts all over the beach. I mean, each one of these bodies was a person, a brother, father, a son, an uncle. There was the sound of landmines going off everywhere. The Germans knew where they were, and they were shooting at them to make them explode. To make matters worse, our helmets had this eerie echo. It was like being in a tunnel. It made the explosions and sounds and men screaming sound even worse. There were 5 or 6 medics in our group. We spread out. There were some Army medics already on the beach working on guys. We were there initially just there to evacuate men, right? So much for that. We'd end up clipping morphine onto their jackets so other medics could see as to not overdose them. The first guy I came to had been shot near his groin. Blood gushing all over the sand. I gave him morphine. He was in shock. An officer. I would see him later in the hospital. He'd gotten gangrene. They had amputated his leg. That haunts me to this day. Did I do enough for him? Did I do the right thing? Guilty feelings always ready to creep in. You always wonder. It never stops. I mean, keep in mind, I was only 18. A lot of us were. So on to the next guy. As I'm approaching, I hear, "Help me, Doc. Am I going to be all right?" You never forget how they look at you. You never forget looking in their eyes. He said to me in a normal voice, "Well, I guess this is my ticket home, right, Doc?" And then he just dies on me. I'm in shock myself. I mean, he sounded so normal. That would be the start of my own PTSD. I would never get that and many other conversations out of my mind. And it would only get worse and more magnified as time went on and appear in my dreams forever. It was horrible seeing young men die all around me. And when you are a medic, everything becomes very personal. Your job is to save lives. And watching these men slip away faster than I can repair them made me feel helpless. And patching them up when you know they are not going to make it, it's a terrible feeling. There was nothing in my training for that. Even when I knew they were not going to make it, I reassured them. They were crying for their mothers, looking straight into my eyes. I prayed to God so many times that day. I was not trained for any of this. And I felt bad lying to these men that they were going to be okay. I know it sounds crazy, but these are the thoughts you have that refuse to go away. These guys yelling, "Mama, Mama, am I going to die?" Pleading, looking at me for some answers, reassuring, some just moaning. It was so personal. My God, he's depending on me. More guilt. Damn. When someone's wounded, I'm worrying that I'm going to get shot while trying to get them fixed up. I mean, there were sounds of German guns everywhere. They never stopped. Don't they ever run out of bullets? I could hear them all day, all around me. I moved bodies closer to me. I even stacked them up. I never told anyone this until recently. I had to shield my patient and myself. I mean, there's no foxholes here. But I find out that PTSD is also full of guilt. So there it is. I never told anyone. 75 years later, I'm having to have this conversation. So meanwhile, on to the next guy. A stomach wound. A lot of blood. I put pressure on the wound with a compress. He's talking to me. "I'm heading home." "Yes, you are," I said. Then dead. Gone. Weirdest feeling. Add that to the PTSD list of relentless video loop. Many hours later, after the beach is finally secured, I'm transported back to the hospital in England to take care of all the wounded in our hospital. I was assigned to the officers' quarters and began working to help as many wounded as I could. The wounds varied from amputees to shrapnel wounds. I had one patient I became close with. He was a young officer. He was married with one child, he told me, and he wanted nothing more than to make it home to his family. Unfortunately, he was losing spinal fluid daily. The doctor pulled me aside and said he's not going to make it. I could not bring myself to tell him he was going to die, and it broke my heart. So instead, I tried to encourage him, and I lied about his recovery. He went into a coma a few days later and died. This was all so traumatic for a man who just turned 18. Even now, when I think back, I cannot help but wipe away the tears. What we needed in that hospital was psychological help, but there was none to be had. After Normandy, I was sent back to New York for a 30-day leave, and I thought I will probably get some stateside duty, but soon found out otherwise. They were sending me to the Pacific, right back into it. My experiences had changed my outlook on life. I went to war with a fervor to fight for my country and protect our freedom. But the experiences had been nothing like what I thought they would be when I signed up to join the Navy. Back home, I thought constantly of the men that died overseas. I kept wondering how I survived. I never dreamed it would be this awful, and that those horrifying images would stick with me now that I was safely home, and for years to come. Those men would never enjoy a family, marriage, and the various joys of life. We are a team. That is why we strive to win. As a team. The great commanders and generals that make the decisions will always be remembered. But as a team is how we survive the war. At 94 years old, I can tell you the reason I am still here, the reason we are all still here, is to touch lives. It's the only thing. I visited the World War II Museum in New Orleans this past September 2015. I was interviewed by video for 90 minutes, and they asked a lot of questions about my experiences and memories. After the interview, I was told, "You are a hero." My response was, anyone that fights, brings food, ammunition, plus the support groups like airmen, ships, medics, and the planners are all heroes. We are a team. That is why we strive to win. As a team. When I hit the beaches, I was an 18-year-old corpsman. I did not feel important. However, when I came upon a wounded man, and he's looking at me, and he's crying out, "Doc, help me, help me," I became the most important man in that soldier's life at that moment.